Okay, first of all, thank you to the previous speakers. I probably will touch a few things, but I will try to give another perspective, the one on the ground. As I work as a clinical psychologist, I meet people human to human. So I will try to give this perspective. And of course, I will try to focus on the mental health. So Lesbos is a Greek island, and as you can see on the map, it's placed close to Turkey, and it's in the Aegean Sea, and this is also one of the entry points to Europe for people looking for safety. And the way the asylum seekers travels is often in boats, quite small boats, and often overloaded. And we just saw a film, and it took us to Greece. And I will start with reading a few lines from a text I wrote when I was in Lesbos. And if you want to read it, which I think you should, it's on the website for Doctors Without Borders. And the Swedish website. As a psychologist, I meet people who are in pain on the inside, but the pain is not caused by a physical injury. The pain can be excruciating, like a physical wound filled with pus, trapped under the skin. Here on Lesbos, I meet people who have so many old wounds inside that it is difficult to understand where one wound ends and another begin. And the crossing over the Aegean Sea often create wounds filled with horror inside the person. And as a psychologist, I can try to work with this experience. I can try to make this wound shrink and perhaps heal, even if the scar will remain. But soon, there are new wounds caused by uncertainty, worry, insecurity, and many difficulties of life in the refugee camp. And this contributes to old wounds flaring up. And the uncertainty of the future and the fear of being forced to return to the situation that caused the original wounds is so huge and so overwhelming that it is difficult to even begin a healing process. And before I continue to talk more about my work on Lesbos, I will just share some facts with you, and they are probably well known, but as a reminder. Asylum seekers has a high rate of mental illness, and mental illness is, as mentioned before, a very broad concept. It includes all from depression and anxiety to PTSD, for example, many more conditions. And we do know quite a lot about the risk factors for developing mental illness. And I will mention a few. Being in a war context, torture, loss of family members or friends, or loss of property, separation from family or friends, starvation, be in danger of death or close to loss of life, sexual violence, harm or threat of harm to loved ones. And these risk factors I just mentioned, they are common among asylum seekers, and they often happen before and during the flight. I will continue with a few more risk factors, and they are also common after the flight in the refugee camp. And then we have poor living conditions, unsafety or worrying, not knowing what will happen next. And a long camp seems to have a negative impact on mental health, as I think you mentioned before with the detention centers. And then we also know quite a lot about condition for developing good mental health or to recover from difficult times. And I will mention a few of those too. And then we have a feeling of safety and feeling of hope. Having trust in both people and process. Predictability, knowing what will happen next. Be with loved ones, family members, or to have contact with them. And of course, we have sleep, eat, and exercise. We know this. Having something meaningful to do as a job. And we know that what happens before and during the flight often interacts negatively with the stressors after the flight in the refugee camp. So asylum seekers are exposed to triggers for mental illness before, during, and after the flight. So then we will move to Lesvos, and the film took us to Greece. And Doctors Without Borders are running a clinic just outside the biggest camp on Lesvos. And the main focus of the clinic is mental health and also sexual violence. And the need for mental health support is huge. So I have met men, women, and children fairly small and adults quite old. I have met them as families, I have met them as couples, and I have met them as individuals. They are from so many different countries. Eritrea, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, Congo, Sierra Leone. I could continue. I would introduce you to a few patients of mine. Of course, they are fictive due to confidentiality, but the ingredients are from humans I met. And when I read this to you, I would like you to keep in mind the risk factors and the well-being factors. First, I want you to meet Sahra. She's 19 years old. She was mistreated as a child. She was physically and psychologically abused. She was not allowed to go to school. When she grew older, she was raped multiple times by the same man, and she was threatened to be killed if she did not agree to marry this rapist. During her escape towards safety, she was abducted and raped again, this time by several men. And here she is in front of me, and she's pregnant. And the father is unknown, but he's one of the rapists from the flight. And she tested positive for hepatitis B in our clinic. And she's really unhappy due to the hepatitis, of course, due to the pregnancy, of course. But her biggest worry, her biggest fear at this point is the asylum process. She's desperate, not having to return to marry her rapist or worse. And then I want you to meet Marie. Marie fled from conflicts and armed clashes inside and around her home. Many of her relatives were killed in these fightings. Her husband was badly injured, and they were both threatened with death. And the eldest daughter was threatened with being taken away as a sex slave. The family was separated during the flight. And now Marie does not know if her husband is alive or not. And she's now alone with her children in the camp. And she constantly worries about her husband and about her children, and she fears that her daughters will be abused in the camp. And as much as she misses her home, because she really, really does, she's terrified of being sent back. And last but not least, I have Bill. Bill ran away from torture, both from community members and from the public officers. He has survived an attempted murder. His body is covered with physical scars. In his home country, he feared death penalty due to sexuality. Bill also survived the shipwreck just outside Lesbos. And many of the asylum seekers in the boat drowned in this shipwreck. And he has received his first refusal in his asylum process. And he's questioning his life due to the fear of being sent back. So, we can conclude that there is a lot of complexities in the different trauma backgrounds. And this is combined with insecurity in the present. And we can see that there is a lot of risk factors and there is a lack of well-being factors. So usually, when I met individuals from the camp, they were in a very bad shape. They were often very, very vigilant. They could sometimes be very flat and the emotions completely cut off. And sometimes they were very expressive with shouting and screaming, and you could smell the fear strong in the room. So, what could I do during the circumstances? Well, first of all, I never knew if the person in the room would still be there for the next session, or if the person already has been transferred to another camp, because Lesbos kept being full, because people keep looking for safety, and the boats kept coming. So I never knew if the person would still be on Lesbos for the next session. And there was also, of course, a limitation of number of sessions due to the enormous need in the camp. And the waiting list kept growing every week. So this actually means that I couldn't treat them as in a psychological treatment. I mean, we do have quite a lot of evidence-based treatment, for example, for PTSD. But to be able to do that, I need to know that the person will still be there, of course. I also need to know that the situation around the person is fairly stable, because if it's not stable, it's not possible to go through this kind of treatment, because usually, at some points, the mental health goes down during the treatment, because it's a very tough treatment. So I need to know that the person would be here to follow the full treatment, and I need to know that the situation is fairly stable, and I need to know that the person is not really, really super fragile. So I couldn't offer this. So what could I do? I could try to stabilize the person in front of me by offering an emotional safe space, a room where I listened, and I didn't judge, and I didn't evaluate what the person were telling me. And I offered a secure interpersonal encounter. I could share some of the difficult emotions that they came with. And for some of these patients, this emotional safe space could actually lead to some stability, and to the patient to actually share the emotions with me, and to share it with someone who offers a bit of a safe space. So I did what I could with the time that I had, and I did what I could with the facts and frames that were there. And I think what I did was often useful for the person I met. I have seen people really fragile regain some of their own strength and to get some kind of stability. And this is the base to heal in the future. But of course, the psychological support could be a lot more effective if the green part were more available. And this includes everything from the situation in the camp to the asylum process, to the roads to come here. So, this is my last picture. And for me, this picture is somehow a little bit symbolic for how I reacted and what I was struggling with. I took this picture one morning when I was walking from my apartment in the city center towards the bus, who should take me to the clinic where I worked. And I was passing by this little beach where I had been sunbathing. And this morning there was this broken boat. And I realized that this night there has been people coming looking for safety. And I think this picture shows a bit of my struggle with the two worlds that I was going back and forth every day. And I will end my part of this presentation with reading the last sentences from the text I started with, that I wrote in Lesvos. And those lines also shows a bit of the impact the work had on me. And this is in the afternoon after I finished my work in the clinic. Then I take a long walk along the water, and I try to get the wind to blow away some of the pain I bring with me from these interpersonal meetings. I have a completely different conditions with my Swedish upbringing and my Swedish citizenship. I see the restaurants and I hear the music in distance as I approach my accommodation in the city, and I try to find the balance in the lottery of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna, also for sharing your own emotions and thoughts about this, and not in the least the testimonies from the people you work with. We're going to invite the two other speakers on stage, but just maybe a first question, and this is also related to the actual place where you worked. And just out of curiosity, because I myself have been in Lesbos, and it's something that I've heard many people of our colleagues say the same thing. It's kind of a surrealistic feeling to realize that you're actually in Europe.
Yeah.
And meet. Is this something you recognize from your time there, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was really a journey between two worlds in the same day all the time. And from me, I never think my privileges has never been as clear as when I was in this place.
Thank you.